I don't always listen to podcasts, but when I do, I listen to STEM Talk, interviewing the most interesting people in the world of science and technology. Stay curious, my friends.
Welcome to STEM Talk.
STEM Talk. STEM Talk. STEM Talk.
STEM Talk. STEM Talk.
Welcome to STEM Talk, where we introduce you to fascinating people who passionately inhabit the scientific and technical frontiers of our society. Hi, I'm your host, Don Carnegas, and I am here today with IHMC's director, Dr. Ken Ford.
Hi, Don. Great to be here with you today for what promises to be a really terrific interview on a topic of great importance to everyone. Today we are joined by two veteran astronauts, Rusty Schweickart of Apollo 9 fame, the first person to pilot the lunar module in preparation for the moon landings, and by IHMC senior scientist Dr. Tom Jones, who flew on 4 space shuttle missions and helped build the current International Space Station.
Although they no longer fly spacecraft, both of them are now involved in another space mission, arguably the most important space mission of all time, one that could save the Earth or a very large part of it from destruction from an asteroid. Rusty and Tom are both experts in planetary defense and have given talks about this issue all around the globe, including at IHMC. I understand that during the time that you chaired the NASA Advisory Council, Rusty and Tom served as co-chairs of the Council's task force on planetary defense. Is that right?
Yes, under their leadership, the task force produced a very solid report, which has proven influential in bringing increased focus and funding to an underappreciated threat. In addition, Rusty has led a mostly privately funded effort known as the B612 Foundation to launch a space-based telescope that would detect dangerous asteroids headed our way. Tom Jones and I both serve as strategic advisors to this wonderful organization, and its current CEO, Ed Liu, will be on a subsequent episode of STEM Talk.
So, Ken, why is it that this topic seems to fly under the radar and be of so little interest in comparison to other threats of much less gravity, so to speak?
That's funny, less gravity. I think it suffers from the sky is falling syndrome, sort of evoking the story of Chicken Little. Also, because political leaders tend to think in terms of news cycles, or at best election cycles, it's hard for them to get very excited about a potentially cataclysmic event that is nearly certain to happen in the long run, but very unlikely in any given year.
Well, before we get to today's interview, we have some housekeeping to take care of. First, we really appreciate all of you who have subscribed to STEM Talk, and we especially appreciate all the wonderful 5-star reviews that are piling up on iTunes.
As we announced in several earlier episodes, the Double Secret Selection Committee has been carefully combing through the iTunes reviews with an eye toward selecting the most notable among the 5-star reviews to read on STEM Talk.
As always, if you hear your review read on STEM Talk, just contact us at stemtalk@ihmc.us to claim your official STEM Talk t-shirt. Today, our winning review was posted by someone named Ian, and here is Ian's review.
I liked the personal aspects of the interviews, and the science is explained at a good level. Easy to follow, but not dumbed down.
Again, thank you to Ian and all of the other STEM Talk listeners who have helped make STEM Talk a success right out of the gate. Okay, on to today's interview.
And no dumbing down.
STEM Talk. STEM Talk.
STEM Talk. STEM Talk.
Hey, Rusty, you sound loud and clear. This is Tom.
Okay, hey, Tom.
Rusty, in 2013, the Earth was hit by an asteroid over Chelyabinsk, Russia. Were you disappointed by the reaction to that? Did it not galvanize people the way you might have thought?
Well, I think it did help, Tom. There's certainly no question about it. It did get a lot of attention, unfortunately, only for about a month or a few weeks in the U.S. Congress. But I think the fact that the Russian population have so many dash cams on in their cars enabled all of us who are involved in this issue, Tom, as you know, to show at almost a drop of the hat, a real asteroid coming down through the atmosphere and the results of that. Luckily, nobody got killed at Chelyabinsk, but nevertheless, it was a pretty good wake-up call, and I think we've got a lot of evidence. The official attention was relatively narrow and, to be frank about it, somewhat off base, I guess I would say. But the reality is that we have a lot of material now, and in addition to that, there's been some very good analysis showing that we learned a lot from the Chelyabinsk impact.
Now, of course, finding out about these objects before they strike the Earth is the whole key to defending the planet. And Chelyabinsk was an example of a small object smacking into the Earth. It was only about, 20 meters across. So, finding them early is the whole key here. And you're chairman of the B612 Foundation, or were the chairman, and you were raising the money and trying to launch a space-based infrared observatory, trying to find asteroids that could threaten Earth and try to accelerate that process. Now, the project has a goal of raising over $400 million to build and launch this telescope. That's something like the equivalent of 4 of the new F-35 jet fighters. How's that fundraising going? How much have you raised, if you can talk about the reception you're finding and your fundraising efforts?
Well, fundraising at that magnitude for something like a space telescope by a nonprofit corporation, a 501c3, has really never been done before. It was a bit of a pioneering effort that we got involved in, principally because NASA had not really been doing very much at the time, several years ago when we started this project. But because NASA had not been moving aggressively to upgrade the telescopes that find these objects, we looked at ourselves, our organization, B612 Foundation, and said, look, the most important thing that can be done right now is to find these objects. And so we decided, why not take it on as a private initiative, since the government seemed to be lagging a bit. The answer is it is very difficult to raise that kind of money, and we've been struggling with that without any question. We've done a lot of work on the design. We've raised enough money, several millions of dollars, which have enabled us to develop the advanced infrared sensors and to also design a very effective mission. Whether we'll be able to complete that job and raise the full funding remains to be seen. I think it's certainly challenging, but it may be, and we frankly would be delighted if any of the infrared telescopes that are being proposed right now, NASA has come back into the game to some extent by having an infrared telescope different from the Sentinel telescope. It's called NeoCam. It's going to be located, if it gets approved, at L1, whereas our telescope, that is the Lagrangian point number 1, about 1 million miles closer to the sun from the Earth, but it follows the Earth around in its orbit, as opposed to Sentinel, which would put an infrared telescope into an orbit between Venus and the Earth.
Yeah,
so
let's get into those details. What's the concept behind a space-based observatory, and why is it important, given that we have ground-based telescopes that already look for asteroids?
Well, there are several different things there, Tom. And you and I ran a panel which addressed these, so it's not as if I'm the source of all information here. You can hop right in there. But first of all, infrared is a very important aspect of these space telescopes that are being proposed. Looking in the visible, which is all you can really do from the ground because of the atmosphere, the atmospheric window, which allows the visible to come through, but not the infrared. When you get into space, you can use an infrared sensor, which gives you a tremendous advantage in that the asteroids are actually hot objects. The sun heats them up. They're about as dark as a piece of charcoal. So all of us know how hot a car, especially a black car, gets in the summer, and that's with a good bit of infrared, with cooling. But if you're an object like that in space, the sun is going to make you very hot. You therefore glow in the infrared, and we're looking in the thermal infrared. The rest of the sky is extremely black in the infrared, so you end up being able to see these very dark objects shine very brightly in the infrared. So that's a major advantage of going into space. However, there are other issues. And if, as NEOCAM is designed, you are going to be following the Earth around. You're locked to the Earth. You're not in orbit around the Earth, but the Lagrangian point where it will be located remains in that location about 1 million miles toward the sun from the Earth. And it looks at the Earth or toward the Earth and sideways to pick up asteroids that come by. But it will always have a very big overlap in terms of what it finds with other telescopes from the ground. They will be looking in the visible as opposed to the infrared, but nevertheless, as someone has said, they're basically fishing in the same pond. When you have a telescope that is located in an orbit between Venus and the Earth, it goes around at a different rate. Its period is less than the period of the Earth, 1 year, and therefore it moves around the sun from the Earth, and it's looking, if you will, or fishing in different ponds all the way around the solar orbit. So there's less overlap in what you see. Now, the price you pay for that, of course, is that you end up very far from the Earth from periods of time, and your communication problems or challenges are considerably greater than if you were 1 million miles from the Earth. You can get up to 150 million miles or more. So there are prices that you pay for it, but the advantage is that you see a somewhat independent segment. And in particular, what you see, which you have a very difficult time seeing from anything locked to the Earth, is objects, asteroids, which have a period very close to 1 year. And a telescope on the Earth or near the Earth, locked to the Earth, will see those objects only very rarely. Sometimes it will take 15 years before you see an object like that a second time. Whereas with a telescope that goes around at a different rate from the Earth, every several years, every year or two, you will find those objects again and again. And so these what are called long synodic period orbits are seen best from telescopes that are not locked to the Earth. So there are pluses and minuses on the different proposals that are being made, but to be perfectly frank about it, either one of these telescopes that we've mentioned, NEOCAM or Sentinel, would be a tremendous addition to the overall armamentarium that we're going to have.
So, Rusty, just this year, NASA crested 12,000 near-Earth asteroids discovered and put in the catalog. And so we know the orbits of those, and NASA's been very successful with its partners at discovering the big asteroids that can cause global damage. They've found more than 95% of those. So none of those are headed our way, but the number of smaller asteroids, the ones that could still punch through the atmosphere and destroy a city-sized area, are really at the low end of the discovery spectrum. We've only discovered about 1%, as we've heard you and Ed Liu repeatedly say. We've only discovered 1% of the objects that could cause damage to a city-sized area on Earth. So the discovery pace is picking up, but we still need to go after these smaller asteroids. And why is it that we haven't gotten as far along in this search for the smaller objects so far?
Well, the smaller objects, of course, Tom, can only be seen when they're very close to whatever telescope you're using to look for them. And that, of course, is the primary problem. There are, as you know, the so-called city killer or Tunguska, the Tunguska impact back in Russia, in Siberia in 1908, was what was later labeled by the Congress in a hearing, actually, a city killer-sized asteroid. And there are about 1 million of those out there. And as you say, we've found about 1% or less of those. And if you go down to the Chelyabinsk size of object, which, of course, did not kill anybody or wipe out a city, but it certainly got everybody's attention, and it came very close. Had it come in a little bit steeper, it may very well have killed a few people. But there are about 10 million of those out there, and we found, less than 1/10 of those. So we have a lot of objects which are the ones which, because of they're so numerous, they're the ones that are going to be hitting the Earth. every 50 years or so. And those are the ones that we would like to find ahead of time. Well, Sentinel would certainly begin to dent that population. I mean, 20-meter objects are very, very difficult to find, and it will probably be a long time before we have what could be called a complete inventory of those. But Sentinel, in combination with the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope, a ground-based telescope that's going to be built by the National Science Foundation and installed in Chile. But in combination with that big telescope on the ground and Sentinel in flight, we've calculated that in about 10 years after beginning operation, we'll find up to 26% or about a quarter of that 20-meter population. But the city killer population, the 40-meter objects, we'll actually find on the order of 81% of those.
Right, and that could be either Sentinel or, you'd get to the same level of discovery with the NeoCam, perhaps just take a little longer. So it's all a question of how we weigh our comfort level with asteroid hazards, how long we wait to discover the ones that might threaten us, how long we might need to mount a deflection mission. That's the whole idea here, is to get early warning so that we could mount some sort of a campaign to move a harmful asteroid off its appointment with Earth in the future. That's the whole goal.
Well, it is the ultimate goal. I mean, if you can take something that is, say, the size of 300 Hiroshima bombs, and prevent it from hitting. If it was going to hit, you can prevent it from hitting. That's really the goal. But if, on the other hand, if you can get even a last-minute warning, essentially think a hurricane-type warning where you've got 2 or 3 days or a week or so of warning that is going to hit, even if you can't prevent it from hitting there at the last minute and you discover it on the way in toward an impact, you could evacuate a local area and save a lot of lives, although property, of course, would be lost. So there's both the short-term warning that we should probably talk about, as well as the long-term warning enabling you, of course, to prevent an impact. Potentially, at least, whereas a short-term warning allows you to avoid, loss of life.
Yeah, the short-term detection and warning of an impending asteroid impact might come from this new NASA-funded telescope called ATLAS. Tell us about that.
Yep. Well, NASA is to be commended here for funding this very interesting and quite low-cost program called ATLAS. It comes out of the University of Hawaii Institute for Astronomy, and John Tonry there, who's the head of the ATLAS program, realized after the 2008 entry of a very small asteroid over the Sudan that was discovered in space, actually about 24 hours or so, 19 hours before it impacted. It was discovered in space. It was tracked. Predictions were made of where it would hit in just a few hours. It did hit right there. There are photographs of it coming through the atmosphere, and there were pieces of it picked up on the ground afterward. So that 2008 TC3 was the nomenclature of that asteroid. When that occurred, people suddenly realized that we could, in fact, with telescopes, with pretty small telescopes, look, if you will, up final approach, sort of like standing at the end of a runway and watching jetliners come down final approach, right? So if you look in the right direction, and that's fairly well defined, you can kind of look up the path where these impacting objects would come from, and you can give, for the very small ones, a few days of warning, and for larger objects that could really wipe out more than a city or even do slight, regional damage, you can get as much as a month or so of early warning. You're not going to be able to prevent the impact in that shorter time period, but you can evacuate and save a lot of lives.
STEM Talk is an educational service of the Florida Institute for Human and Machine Cognition, a not-for-profit research lab pioneering groundbreaking technologies aimed at leveraging and extending human cognition, perception, locomotion, and resilience.
To me, there's an inescapable education that you get when you're an astronaut. You can't help but look down at the Earth and see impact scars from past asteroid impacts, both small and large. You look up at the moon from Earth orbit, and the moon looks very crisp and clear. And it's, of course, scarred by thousands and thousands of craters covering one upon the other. So you see the evidence for what the Earth and the Moon system have gone through from past asteroid impacts. You know that they're going to be inevitable in the future. So if you're going to come back to the Earth and do anything with your experience, it might be in this area of planetary protection, where you want to preserve the ecosystem, the biosphere that we have here, and prevent a very preventable natural disaster with the technology that we've developed in the last 50 years.
You know, this is a space-based or a cosmic natural hazard. And we're very familiar, everyone's very familiar with things like hurricanes or floods or earthquakes, tsunamis, things of that kind, which happen many times in a person's lifetime. This one happens to be a cosmic natural hazard. Maybe it will happen on average once in a person's lifetime, and that may be into the ocean, so they may not even be aware of it. But you know, the irony is that this is a natural hazard, and one of the only ones that we can think of where we actually, with our space technology, can do something about it. So my feeling is, you know, being a space guy, you know, if we can use space technology to find these things, to predict an impact, and to actually prevent an impact, then you got to do it. I mean, that's a slam dunk, you know. If you can save lives from a natural hazard and prevent a disaster, my God, how can you not do it?
I love space history, and getting a chance to talk to Rusty about the lunar exploration program, the Apollo program, is a great opportunity for me. It's just a chance to hear from a veteran what it was really like during those space race days of the 1960s. So, Rusty, you know, when people think of the Apollo program these days, they think probably only about Neil, Buzz, and Mike on Apollo 11. That's probably what they've learned in the history class or seen on a documentary. But your mission, that was Apollo 11, but your mission, Apollo 9, coming just a few months earlier, 6 months earlier, played a very critical role in getting people to the moon. And how was that role for Apollo 9? What was the critical point of it?
Well, Tom, you're very generous. Thank you for asking. You know, ironically, you understated the issue. Our mission was only 3 months before the Apollo 11 mission.
Yeah, March to July, right?
So there was even another mission, Apollo 10, in between them. I mean, we were really moving very rapidly to meet JFK's goal of, you know, getting a man to the moon and back safely to the Earth before the end of that decade. That was, you know, perhaps the most challenging and gutsy goal-setting episode in human history, actually. So everyone was completely dedicated to that mission. I mean, we worked 9 days a week. Nobody thought anything about it. I mean, I mean, in terms of putting in that time, it was just built into the whole society, but in particular into NASA, and of course, in our case, into the astronauts themselves. But we were really moving. It was not at all clear after the Apollo 1 accident, which killed 3 people, that we were going to be able to make that mission. And Apollo 9, in March of 1969, was a key mission because it basically tested all of the key technologies that had to work. The design, it was the first flight of the lunar module. It was also the first time that the new Apollo spacesuit had been used outside the spacecraft in a vacuum. And I got the privilege of doing that testing, as well as testing the lunar module and its performance with my commander, Jim McDivitt, while Dave Scott, you know, stayed put in the mothership, the command and service module, while we went out and 100 miles away without a heat shield and came back to our heat shield and Dave. That was as somebody once said, you know, that was probably the gutsiest thing somebody did since the first raw oyster was eaten.
So checking out the lunar module, it took you several days. You had probably the initial checkout. Then you conducted a spacewalk from the lunar module. And then you had this independent free flight. How long did you spend in the LEM on that Apollo 9 mission?
The lunar module operate, unlike the command service module, which had fuel cells and a fair amount of the supporting gases which enabled us to generate our own electricity. The lunar module had only batteries. And essentially, those batteries would only last 3 to 4 days once you enabled them when you first went in the lunar module. So we went into the lunar module on the 3rd day of the mission, and by the 6th day of the mission, after we completed the rendezvous and docking, that was the end of the electricity. So we had to kick it off the nose, and there went the Spider, our precious little hot rod into space.
And did you get in all the test work needed during those couple of 3 days?
We did. We met all of the objectives. Nothing was missed that was planned. At the same time, we could not, of course, test the critical issues connected with a landing per se. That is, the only thing we could do would be to put out the landing legs and make sure that they worked and that kind of thing. But the landing radar couldn't be tested on our flight. That needed Apollo 10, which made a low approach to the moon and did the final testing of all of the systems that were directly connected with the landing of the lunar module per se. But all of the systems functions and the launch, the testing of the engines, the rendezvous and docking procedures, which we tested on Apollo 9, everything went beautifully.
When you and Jim McDivitt pulled away from your command and service module with Dave Scott and cast off and sailed away in your heat shield-less lunar module, it must have made the hair on the back of your neck stand up a little bit. What was your reaction to that?
No, we were too busy for that to happen. I mean, Tom, as you well know from your experience in the shuttle, you do a tremendous amount of simulation on the ground. You spend days, hour after hour, day after day, week after week, simulating the things that you're going to do, and in particular, the critical things like the rendezvous, the separation, moving out, as you said, the maneuvering, all of that, the engine firings, all of those things you do hundreds, if not thousands of times in simulations on the ground. And unlike, in most cases, unlike in flight, where everything goes right, on the ground in a simulation, those idiots outside, who control the simulation are always making things go wrong. And so the really critical time, the times when you're sweating and the hair's standing up on the back of your neck, is in the simulations when one thing after another is failing and you're still trying to get back alive. So those are the times when that excitement comes up. In flight, the irony was McDivitt and I are going through this rendezvous process, and we're standing there looking at each other and saying, why do we have all this time? and the reason was that nothing was failing, So it was, it's certainly exciting, but it wasn't in any way scary, actually. You get a lot of confidence in the really excellent simulations that NASA gives you.
If you can look back on that whole mission experience, start to finish, what would be the top moment that you remember today? Most rewarding personally, perhaps.
Yeah, sure. For me, it was going outside, testing the spacesuit, the new Hamilton Standard suit that was made for Apollo, which was far more flexible and easy to use, easy to move your arms, to bend your legs. All of those joint motions were much, much better in the new Apollo suit. And I went outside to demonstrate that and discovered, of course, as we knew from our work on the ground, that in fact it was much more flexible and would enable my buddies, on subsequent flights to run around on the surface of the moon and get the job done. But being outside the spacecraft, as you know, that's a real privilege. That's when the view of the Earth it comes through to you. This incredibly beautiful planet that we live on, the atmosphere that forms that thin iridescent blue band at the edge of the Earth that separates this incredible planet we live on from the blackness of space. I mean, that you come to appreciate the beauty of Mama.
So how long did it take, maybe thinking about that spacewalk experience, looking at your involvement in the Skylab program, when was the moment downstream that, you started to get interested in planetary defense and asteroid impacts and searching for hazardous asteroids? How did you make that transition from spacecraft engineer and explorer to planetary protection officer?
Yeah, actually, that came about in the late '90s, the mid to late '90s, when NASA initiated its program in astrobiology. That's a wonderful program where NASA took a whole bunch of different disparate things that were looking at, extremely high altitude physics in the Earth's atmosphere. They were looking at exobiology and all kinds of different things, a patchwork quilt of things, and they put it all together and said anything that deals with the origins of life, the extent of life in space, the nature of the diverse nature of the environments within which life can develop and survive and live, all of those things we're going to call astrobiology, and we're going to set up this whole program. And that was a fascinating decision that NASA made, and I got very interested in it in the beginning. And as soon as you start looking at the origins and history of life on Earth, you cannot avoid asteroid and comet impacts on the Earth. Asteroids and comets brought water, they brought hydrocarbons to the early Earth, out of which life developed. Nobody yet understands how life actually formed or where it formed. But the whole process of impacts is intimately tied up with the origins and the development and evolution of life. And I, for the first time, when I got looking at that, realized the incredible amount of energy that's released when you have impacts of asteroids with the Earth itself. And as soon as I realized not only the energy released by impacts with the Earth, but the tremendous numbers of impacts that had occurred over the lifespan of the Earth, the frequency with which they occur, the numbers of objects out there which can potentially impact the Earth. Wow, that was a real awakening. So that's how I made that transition from life to, in a sense, preserving life on Earth over the long haul.
So, Rusty, we're trying to get the discovery rate of asteroids up. What can the ordinary person do about influencing this search rate and accelerating the pace at which we're looking for hazardous asteroids?
Yeah, that's always been, one of the real questions that I've had at all the work that I've done on the asteroid issue. The question is, how can you really productively involve the general public? And interestingly, this is a very, very special time right now. There are so many key decisions that are going to be made on funding and supporting these telescopes, which are critical to being able to discover, track, and predict asteroids impacting the Earth in the future. So this is a very, very important time over the next year or so. And in recognizing that, a group of us, you're included, I'm included, and many other people, in the celebration of Asteroid Day. And part of Asteroid Day, a very key part, was a declaration that we developed back several months ago, and this has been signed by 100 experts and specialists and dignitaries, celebrities, others, called the 100X Asteroid Declaration. And this declaration calls on governments and space agencies of the world to launch infrared telescopes, get other telescopes going so that we can up our game by 100 times. We need to discover asteroids at a rate 100 times what we've been discovering them up to date. And this declaration calls for that. And on Asteroid Day, we're asking all of the many, hopefully millions of people who are involved in various celebrations of Asteroid Day to go onto the website asteroidday.org, which is up and running now and has a lot of good information on it. But on Asteroid Day, we're going to ask everybody who participates in this to be signing online that asteroid declaration, that 100x asteroid declaration, which enables everybody to really impress upon the political leaders, the people who collect and finance projects with tax money, to say, we've got to get serious about taking responsibility for the future of life on Earth. Let's up our game. Let's get it done now.
You're listening to STEM Talk, an educational service of the Florida Institute for Human and Machine Cognition.
A great part of the Planetary Defense Conference every couple of years is to conduct an asteroid response exercise. And this one flowed throughout the 5 days of the conference. And the way it was set up was, we had notice of a pending asteroid impact, not a high probability of an impact, but it was enough to get the policymakers and engineers start to think about it. And in the course of the week, the experts fed further chapters in the scenario to us attendees at the conference. And so by the end of the week, we had a very clear threat of an asteroid impact in South Asia. It turned out to be going to be slamming into the Earth in Bangladesh with about a 20 megaton impact. It was going to unfortunately be over a major city called Dhaka in Bangladesh. And so the whole scenario was designed to exercise the early warning function, how you communicate that to the public. Then it got engaged the community that plans space missions to deflect a hazardous object. And in the end, the way the technology was applied, we partially diverted the asteroid, broke it into fragments, but one big enough chunk was going to make it through the atmosphere and smack this big city in Bangladesh. So in the end, we actually got the disaster response community involved. How do you evacuate? How do you warn people to take shelter? And we went all the way through the scenario. I think the bottom line for me was that although a lot of good work has been done in detection and warning of asteroid impacts and perhaps thinking about how to deflect them, one of the biggest problems we face is human nature. How do we get people to plan early to respond to a future and very rare catastrophe so that we have an effective response when the time comes? And I think the lessons were taken to heart.
Tom, as you know, I wasn't able to make the conference itself this year for the first time. But interestingly, the European Space Agency was doing live telecasting of it, putting it online. And so I was sitting here in California. Unfortunately, with the time difference, I couldn't watch some of the parts of the conference, but I did get to watch the readout each day for the first 3 days of the reaction of all of the different teams. You were part of one team. There were political teams. There were there were media teams. There were the general public. There were different countries, different groups of countries. There were all sorts of different role-playing teams set up.
Right. I was in the affected countries team. So we were the folks who were along the risk corridor where the asteroid might come down.
Right. And it was very, very impressive. I was blown away by how much of the confusion, the misinformation, the disinformation, the ambiguities, the need for more information that came out in the different roles that were played. In particular, some of the national self-interest, where we had political leaders from different groups of countries playing that role, and the self-interest that began to creep in and get in the way of cooperation, I thought was a dramatic part, as well as the general public confusion about what in the world is an asteroid impact and what do you do about it. And we keep hearing all different kinds of things. Who's telling the truth? Does anybody really know what's going on, etc.? I mean, I thought it was a very, very realistic, the most realistic scenario so far that I've seen at any of the planetary defense conferences. So congratulations. That was, to me, that was a great exercise. And I've tried to make that available on the asteroidday.org website, by the way.
Good. Yeah, I think the more people who can learn about that exercise and take away some of the lessons that were distilled from it, the more knowledge there'll be about how to take on a real threat when it occurs.
I don't always listen to podcasts, but when I do, I listen to STEM Talk, interviewing the most interesting people in the world of science and technology. Stay curious, my friends.
Okay, so Rusty, we talk about detecting and warning about hazardous asteroids, and we know that we can apply some space technology to use various techniques to make them miss their appointments with Earth and avoid an asteroid impact. But it's a more complex issue than that, in that it's a global hazard. It's going to affect many countries around the world when we finally see an asteroid coming our way. So we have to struggle with how we deal with this internationally as a community. What do you think we've learned so far about how to cooperate, and where are the big areas where improvements need to be made?
Well, gosh, that is such a fascinating subject, Tom, and it's not one that people intuitively pick up on. It originates in the fact that when we make measurements with our telescopes and pick up these asteroids in space and figure out where they are and what their orbits are, there's no such thing, as you and I know, as anybody who's involved in science knows, there's no such thing as a perfect measurement. And so while we know where these asteroids are and what their orbits are, we don't know them perfectly. We know them very well, but imperfectly. And if you're looking ahead in time, say 20 or 30 or 40 years to where it's going to be then, that slight imperfection grows into an uncertainty, which makes the issue, in fact, a global problem and not a problem of precisely where it's going to hit, because you don't know precisely where it's going to hit until very late in the game. The uncertainty, if you project forward today's uncertainty, it translates into not where is the orbit of the asteroid, but where along the orbital path is the asteroid actually located. In fact, instead of being a point on that orbital track, the uncertainty is a line, if you will. And that line of uncertainty is, until very late in the game, and sometimes almost all the way to impact, quite extensive. Many, many thousands of kilometers, and in some cases early on, even as much as hundreds of thousands or 1 million times the diameter of the Earth. So the uncertainty projecting out into the future and looking at the Earth and saying, well, where might this impact, is for a very, very long time a line all the way across the Earth. It's not a point on the Earth. It'll actually hit somewhere. If it is going to hit the Earth, it'll be a point ultimately. But what we're going to know about it at the time that we have to make a decision to launch a vehicle to prevent the impact, generally speaking, that uncertainty line goes all the way across the whole planet. And in fact, what we can say, the only thing we can say is that if this asteroid does hit the Earth, it's going to hit somewhere on that line, not somewhere else on the Earth. But that line, if you draw any line all the way across the planet, it's going to go across many countries, 5, 10, 20 different countries. And so at the time decisions have to be made, nobody will know, in many cases, if it's going to hit the Earth, and if it's going to hit the Earth, where on that line it's going to hit. So this is a decision which the Earth has got to make, the nations of the Earth together, not one individual country. And that's where the geopolitical element comes in, and why you and I and others that have worked with us in the Association of Space Explorers have brought this issue to the United Nations. And luckily, as you know, the United Nations has been doing a pretty good job, albeit typically the long time constant of anything that gets done in the United Nations. So it's taken many years, but in fact, the United Nations has, to some extent now, taken real ownership of this challenge.
I think it was great to see at the Planetary Defense Conference a side meeting there of the Space Missions Planning Advisory Group, where the space agencies themselves are now taking on the planning of perhaps a future deflection demonstration and a future deflection campaign, so they can have some plans already on the shelf. And that collaboration between the space agencies, NASA, and the others that were interested came directly out of discussions at the United Nations, recognizing that we don't know where along this line the asteroid impact is going to occur. It's going to affect many countries. And should we try to move the asteroid in its orbit so that it misses the Earth completely, it's going to subject one country after another to a possible higher probability of impact. So everybody's in the game together. And I think that recognition has resulted in the International Asteroid Warning Network and the Space Missions Planning Advisory Group, both blessed, if you will, by the United Nations.
Yeah, Tom, and of course, frankly, you and I have played and the Association of Space Explorers played a very key role in first addressing this issue and forming a group of experts and making a recommendation or a report, which we sent into the United Nations, which triggered a lot of this work that's been going on. That work has been wonderful. The ownership that the UN has taken and the results in the formation of, as you say, the IAWN, the International Asteroid Warning Network, and the so-called same page space mission planning group. The one thing which was interesting in watching the simulation was that the nations of the world, as represented in that simulation, in many cases didn't seem to be at all aware of the fact that the UN was trying to coordinate things. And I think that was a very realistic response by the people playing those roles. I think putting the meat on the bones, on the skeleton that we created in our work in the United Nations is a major job over the next decades in order to see that is a truly functional international coordination mechanism.
Right, and we need to get the warning or detection rate up so that we have the comfortable pad, the margin of time that we need to let these discussions go forward before we actually have to take action. So
absolutely. And every signature that people who are listening to this podcast and their friends and neighbors can put on that 100X declaration will help to ensure exactly that. So I think for the first time, I've been seeing really a genuine critical role for the general population to really speak out and insist that we take responsibility for the future of life here on Earth.
So, Rusty, thanks a lot for the time to discuss the entire subject of planetary defense. And I want listeners to know that they can check out two great sources of information about planetary defense and the asteroid hazard. There's the NASA website for the NASA Near-Earth Object Program Office, and that's called neo.jpl.nasa.gov. If they go to that website, neo.jpl.nasa.gov, they'll find all the basics about the asteroid hazard and how fast we're finding them. NASA operates that website. And then, as Rusty mentioned, there's the asteroidday.org, asteroidday.org website, which talks about the events coming up on June 30th this year, talking about the asteroid hazard and what people can do to help us find asteroids in time to fend them off. Rusty, it's been great talking to you. I'll see you on email, okay?
Okay, Tom. Right. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
STEM Talk.
STEM Talk.
STEM Talk.
STEM Talk. STEM Talk.
It was really cool to listen to Rusty and Tom, both experts on planetary defense, discuss asteroid detection and possible deflection methods.
Yes, Don. Rusty shared a ton of good information about a serious topic that is, frankly, not often taken sufficiently seriously. We will return to this topic in the near future.
I invite you to visit the STEM Talk webpage where one can find the show notes for this show and for every episode of STEM Talk, stemtalk.us. This is Don Carnegas signing off for now.
And Ken Ford's saying goodbye until next time.
Thank you for listening to STEM Talk. We want this podcast to be discovered by others, so please take a minute to go to iTunes to rate the podcast and perhaps even write a review. More information about this and other episodes can be found at our website, stemtalk.us. There, you can also find more information about the guests we interview.